It was 1985, and I was working the late shift at Riverside State Asylum. For the most part, the nights were predictable, the same monotonous cycle of medication rounds, monitoring patients, and the occasional outburst. These were the things I had come to expect from my job as a night nurse in a psychiatric facility. There was a routine to it all, a rhythm. You could almost set your watch by the shift change, the quiet lulls, and even the louder moments. The screams of patients in various stages of mental breakdowns. But this night, it would prove to be anything but ordinary. It would be the one that haunted me for the years that followed. I remember checking the clock, 11:26 p.m. when it happened. The scream started, but this wasn't the usual type of scream. It wasn't the desperate wailing of a patient lost in delusions or the manic shrieks of someone experiencing an episode. No, this was something else. It was primal. It was guttural. The kind of scream that cuts through you, leaving a trail of dread in its wake. The kind of sound that makes your blood freeze. It came from the East Wing, where we housed our most troubled and volatile patients, the patients who couldn't be trusted alone, whose erratic behavior often made them a danger to themselves or others. Melissa Matthews was one of our newest admissions. She had been admitted just weeks before, diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, but the more I observed her, the more I began to realize that there was something far darker at play, something that couldn't be explained by a psychiatric diagnosis alone. By the time I reached her room, there were already 8 staff members gathered outside, all standing at a distance, unsure of how to proceed. They were all watching her through the small glass window on the door. Melissa was pacing back and forth, her movements frantic, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She looked like she was about to snap. I pushed open the door, immediately assaulted by the overwhelming tension in the room. The atmosphere was thick, charged with a sense of impending violence. Melissa stood in the far corner, clutching a scalpel from the medical bay in one trembling hand. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and completely unrecognizable. "Stay back," she growled. The voice that came from her wasn't hers at all. It was deep, masculine, threatening, a voice that seemed to come from somewhere inside her, a place she could no longer control. "They're inside me! They're trying to get out!" The scalpel shook in her hand, its blade reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. She backed herself further into the corner, her eyes darting around as if she were being watched by something invisible. The other staff members stood frozen at the door, unsure whether to intervene or wait for further orders. The air was thick with dread. Then, in an instant, it changed. Her voice softened, becoming a whisper. "Please, please help me. They're moving under my skin." She clutched her abdomen, her fingers digging into her asylum gown as tears welled in her eyes. It was heartbreaking, but before anyone could react, that other voice returned. Louder, more violent. I could feel the tension in the room reaching a breaking point, and I knew that something terrible was about to happen. The room seemed to close in around me as Melissa's body twitched. She looked down at her stomach, and in a flash, she plunged the scalpel deep into her own flesh. The sound of the blade slicing through skin was sickening. "I'll show you," she screamed, her voice feral. "I'll show you what they did to me." Blood began to seep through her asylum gown, staining the white fabric crimson. She dragged the scalpel sideways, her face contorted in pain and fury as she carved into herself. The staff members were paralyzed, frozen in place, as we all watched in horror. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I could hear the sound of my heartbeat thundering in my ears, but my body refused to move. This was more than I was prepared for. In that moment, Dr. Henderson, our head psychiatrist, entered the room. He had been the one to admit Melissa, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of distrust whenever I saw him. His methods were unconventional, even for psychiatric care, but at that moment, we were all relying on him to calm the situation, to get Melissa to stop mutilating herself. He approached cautiously, speaking in a calm, measured tone. "Melissa, listen to me. You're in control. We can help you, but you have to stop. Right now." But Melissa didn't hear him. She was no longer Melissa. She was something else, something that had taken her over completely. I couldn't take it anymore. Years of working in psychiatric care had prepared me for a lot of things, but nothing had prepared me for this. Nothing had prepared me for Melissa's breakdown. The sight of her pulling at her own flesh, her screams echoing in the sterile cold room, was too much. I ran from the room, stumbling down the hallway, and barely made it to the waste bin before I emptied the contents of my stomach. The cold tile under my feet seemed to mock me as I tried to regain my composure, but the images of Melissa, of the blood, would not leave my mind. It was as though I could still feel the scalpel in my hands, the weight of it. The aftermath was swift, and it was devastating. Melissa survived, though barely. She was sedated and placed under strict supervision for the next few weeks. The staff, too, were shaken. We couldn't erase what had happened, no matter how much we tried to act like it was just another day at Riverside. But it wasn't just Melissa's breakdown that haunted me, it was Dr. Henderson's role in it. Later, I would learn the truth. Dr. Henderson had been experimenting with new treatment methods, ones that were not only untested, but dangerous. He had been secretly administering high doses of hallucinogens to certain patients, including Melissa, believing that he could break through to their subconscious minds, allowing them to confront the trauma that had shattered them. But what he didn't realize, or perhaps what he refused to acknowledge, was that he was only making things worse. His notes, when we finally got our hands on them, were a disturbing glimpse into his madness. In them, he referred to his methods as a necessary evil, a way to transcend the limits of conventional psychiatry in order to heal the broken mind. But all it had done was push Melissa over the edge, and there was no coming back from that. The Asylum administration tried to bury the entire incident. Dr. Henderson vanished that night, his office emptied, his belongings gone. His car was found 3 days later parked at Miller's Bridge, a place known for its dark history. His journal was the only thing they found with him, filled with rambling notes about the price of progress and what must be done to unlock the mind's true possibilities. It was clear that Dr. Henderson had crossed a line, but the asylum did everything it could to hide his actions. An investigation was launched, but it was swept under the rug. The asylum's reputation was at stake, and no one wanted the public to know about the rogue psychiatrist and his unapproved drug trials. The truth came out in pieces, but we all knew what had happened. We were the ones who had witnessed it. I transferred to outpatient care the following month. I couldn't stay in Riverside after that. After what I had seen, I couldn't walk those halls anymore. But sometimes, I still think about Melissa. I still hear the sound of her voice. The two voices, fighting for control. The voice of the woman who had begged for help, and the other voice, deep and angry, that had condemned her to a fate she couldn't escape. I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, wondering if I could have done something different, something more. But deep down, I know the truth. Sometimes there's no saving people. Sometimes the monsters aren't the ones locked away in padded cells. They're the ones who hide in plain sight, cloaked in the guise of healers and doctors. The asylum closed down in 1989, and I heard that the building was eventually demolished. Good riddance. But there are nights, when the wind blows just right, that I drive past the abandoned site, and for a brief moment, I swear I can still hear the echoes of those screams. They never really leave. What do you think about Dr. Henderson's actions? Do you believe there's a darker side to the medical field that we sometimes fail to see? What would you have done if you were in my shoes that night? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts, or any similar experiences you might have encountered. Let's start a conversation about the thin line between science and madness. If you're enjoying these chilling stories from Bone-Chilling Nightmare, don't forget to hit that like button, share this nightmare with your friends, and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories that will keep you up at night. Your support helps us bring you more eerie experiences, and with every share, we get closer to unlocking the next terrifying chapter. Stick around, the next story is just a click away, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. In psychiatric medicine, they tell you to never turn your back on a patient, not because they're dangerous, but because you might miss the moment they need you most. I learned this lesson too late with the man we called the Counter. It was 1971. The asylum sat in the middle of nowhere, its white walls more like a tomb than a place for healing. I'd walked these halls for nearly a year, the sterile scent of antiseptic constantly hanging in the air, the flickering fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over everything. There were no windows, no natural light to give the building any life. Every room felt as cold as the metal beds and medical equipment that filled them. The hum of outdated machines filled the air like a constant reminder that progress in the field of psychiatry had stopped somewhere long ago. This place felt stuck in time, a relic of another era. And so were we, the staff and the patients, trapped in our own little world, in a system that was failing everyone. I was young and idealistic when I first arrived, thinking I could make a difference. I believed I could heal minds, repair broken souls. But that belief began to unravel the moment I met the Counter. I had no idea then that I would learn the harshest lesson of my career from him. The lesson that would break everything I thought I knew about sanity, medicine, and what it truly means to help someone. I had always been drawn to psychiatric care because of the stories I had heard from my father, a doctor who had taught me the importance of understanding the human mind. He used to say that healing wasn't just about treating the symptoms, it was about connecting with the person underneath. I was determined to bring that idealism into my work. But when I arrived at the asylum, the stark reality of the place began to sink in. No one had the time or resources to connect with anyone, not the patients, not the staff. We were all just going through the motions, trying to do the best we could with what little we had. But then I met him, the man we called the Counter. His real name was lost to time, and perhaps even to him. We never knew much about his past, except that he had been a soldier during the Vietnam War. At least that was the story we pieced together from his fragmented, disjointed ramblings. No one knew how he had ended up here, in this place that seemed to swallow people whole. I'm not sure how they brought him in, but one thing was clear from the moment I saw him. The Counter wasn't like the others. His hands were always moving, twitching, fingers sliding in a constant rhythmic motion, counting counting the tiles on the floor, counting the breaths he took, counting the minutes. He was a man trapped in a pattern of numbers. It was the only thing that gave him some semblance of control in a world that had stripped him of everything else. The first time I saw him, he was sitting in the corner of the day room, eyes unfocused, staring into the void. His fingers moved in time with the ticking of the clock on the wall. At first, I thought it was some kind of nervous tick, but then I noticed the way his eyes flickered when the second hand moved, the way his breathing quickened when he reached the top of his count. I watched him for a long time, wondering what went on inside his mind, what stories he might have been telling himself. I was curious, so I approached him one afternoon during group therapy. The cooking class was meant to be a chance for the patients to interact with each other in a relaxed setting. The smell of burnt onions hung thick in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of the kitchen's old equipment. The counter sat at the far end of the table, his hands moving rapidly as if performing an invisible task only he could understand. The other patients avoided him, casting wary glances in his direction. I didn't blame them. There was something about him, something unsettling, that made people keep their distance. When I spoke to him, he barely responded. His eyes seemed to focus on me for a moment, but they were vacant, as if he was looking through me, not at me. His lips moved in barely audible whispers, repeating the same words over and over. They told me I counted. I have to count. Everything. 1, 2, 3. His voice was thin, cracked, as though the war had stolen his ability to speak anything else. But there was a hint of sadness in it, a sadness so deep, so ingrained, that it made my heart ache for him. He wasn't just lost in his own mind. There was something else there, a history that I couldn't quite piece together. I tried to engage him, but he only rocked back and forth, his body moving in time with his fingers as they twitched and shifted. Weeks passed, and I began to study him more closely. I discovered something troubling. His counting wasn't just a nervous habit. It was compulsive, ritualistic. Every movement of his hands had a purpose, a rhythm, a meaning that was locked away in his shattered mind. And the more I watched him, the more I began to see the patterns, the way his counting aligned with the passing of time, the clock, the minutes, the hours. They were his guide, his anchor, in a world where nothing else made sense. His mind wasn't just fractured by trauma, it was structured by it. His memories of the war, the violence, the bloodshed, those memories were woven into the very fabric of his obsession. The counter wasn't just counting for the sake of it. He was counting the dead, the ones he had lost, the ones he had killed. I began to piece together the fragments of his stories. The Vietnam War had taken everything from him, his friends, his innocence, his sanity, but it had also left him with one thing, the need to count. He counted everything, the bodies, the battles, the pain. It was the only way he could make sense of what had happened to him, the only way he could keep track of what had been lost. I didn't realize how far gone he was until one night, in the dead of darkness, I approached his room. The hallways were empty. The staff was nowhere to be found. I had heard rumors, whispers, about the things he said when no one was around, about the strange things he did in his sleep. But I didn't believe them, not at first. As I walked down the empty hallway, I saw the glow of his room light flickering. His door was slightly ajar. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The light dimmed once more, and for a moment I thought I saw something move in the corner of the room. a shadow. It was the way his hands twitched as he counted, the way his fingers moved in unnatural synchronization with the shadows. The room felt colder than it should have. I watched for a few minutes, frozen, as his counting grew more frantic, more desperate. It was like he was trying to hold on to something, anything, that could make sense of the chaos in his mind. Then suddenly, the lights dimmed completely. The hallway was empty, quiet. His counting stopped. I took a step forward, my breath catching in my throat. His eyes locked with mine, wide and unblinking. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice hollow. "The ones I counted. They're coming for me. They're coming for all of us." I didn't know what to say. My heart raced as I backed away slowly, my mind reeling. Was he talking about the war? The ghosts of those he had left behind? Or was it something worse? Something more real? Weeks later, after a particularly violent outburst, the counter was confined to a solitary cell. His episodes of aggression had become more frequent, more terrifying. He was a danger to everyone, including himself. But I couldn't stop thinking about the last words he'd said to me, the ones that still echoed in my head. I went to see him again. This time the doctor was with me. But when we entered his cell, there was something wrong. The counter was sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth, his hands moving in their usual rhythmic pattern. His eyes were wide, unseeing, and his mouth was open, but there were no words. The doctor tried to speak to him, but the counter didn't respond. He was lost in his own world, one that had swallowed him whole. I watched for a long time, helpless, until the doctor turned to me and said, "Some cases aren't meant to be healed. Some minds are too broken to fix." And that's when I realized the truth. The asylum, the treatments, the endless drugs and therapies, they were all just distractions. We weren't here to heal. We were here to manage. And even then, we were losing. I left the asylum shortly after that, but I can't forget the last day I spent there, the last time I saw the counter. He was still there. He'd changed, yes, but the essence of what he was, of who he had been, still lingered in that cold, sterile room. Years have passed since I walked those halls, but sometimes, late at night, I still count my fingers, just to make sure I haven't lost track of anything important. Hey there, my lovely horror fans! If you're enjoying this chilling story so far, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel now, like this video, and share it with your fellow horror enthusiasts. We've got plenty more spine-tingling stories coming your way, so stay with us as we cruise into the next chapter of terror. Winter, 1982. St. Augustine State Asylum stood against the gray sky like a forgotten monument, its Gothic architecture a crumbling remnant of the darker days in mental health care. The building was vast, with high arched windows and maze of winding corridors that seemed to go on forever. Even in the dead of night, it was a place that never felt truly quiet. The creaks of the old wooden floors and the occasional distant clang of metal bars were the only sounds that kept you company when the world outside was buried under layers of snow. I had been working there for 3 months as a night orderly, and by that time I had already begun to feel the unease creeping in. The asylum was a place that consumed your thoughts, that seeped into your dreams. You never really escaped it. I wasn't a psychiatrist or nurse, just a lowly orderly, but the job was still unsettling. My role was simple: keep the patients under control, make sure the lights were on, and ensure the place didn't fall apart by morning. But some nights, it felt like everything was one misstep away from complete chaos. Among the many patients that roamed the asylum's halls, there was one who stood out: the Shadow Man. His real name was Thomas Reeves, but he hadn't answered to that in years. He had been a patient at St. Augustine's for over 5 years, though no one could say exactly why he had been committed. Back then, we weren't given much information. We just did our job, and it was easier that way. If you didn't ask questions, you didn't have to know the details of why someone was locked away. The Shadow Man earned his nickname not because of his appearance, though he did look like something out of a nightmare, but because of the way he moved. He would slink along the walls, his body hunched, his hands twisted up near his face like he was hiding something. Or maybe trying to keep something from escaping. He never spoke clearly, just muttered endless streams of incoherent words, like a person trapped in a world only they could understand. And the worst part, the muttering never stopped, not even when he slept. Every time I did my rounds, I could count on seeing him. He'd be in the same spot, pressed against the wall, rocking slightly, his lips moving, his eyes wide and vacant. His face had long since lost any resemblance to normalcy. His hair was wild, and his eyes, God, those eyes, were filled with an emptiness that made your stomach twist. I remember the first time I saw him up close. His eyes locked onto mine for a moment, and for a second I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just madness, it was something darker, something deeper. One night, everything changed, and it was during group activities. If you could even call it that. There was no real therapy going on back then, at least not the kind that people talk about today. It was more about keeping the patients occupied, giving them something to do so they weren't just sitting in their rooms all day. The staff would sit around, watching people in imagined games on their screens. I mean, it was that night. The Shadow Man was standing in his usual corner, his back against the wall, rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. I had just finished checking on the other patients when I noticed the smell. He'd soiled himself, something that happened often in the asylum, a grim part of the routine. I called out to the nurse, not thinking about it. "Nurse, got a mess over here." But as soon as the words left my mouth, everything changed. The Shadow Man's head snapped up so violently that I thought his neck might break. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, his pupils dilating to the point of swallowing up the white of his eyes. Then, without warning, he opened his mouth, and what came out of it wasn't a mutter, it wasn't even a scream. It was a horrible, soul-shaking noise. A sound so primal and raw that it seemed to cut through the very air itself, vibrating the walls, the kind of scream that you didn't just hear, it reverberated in your bones. I remember the other patients starting to scream in response. It was like some kind of contagion, a chain reaction. Soon the entire ward was in chaos. Patients thrashing, shouting, crying out in fear. It was as if the very act of hearing the Shadow Man's scream set off a primal panic that none of us could contain. The orderlies and nurses rushed in to try and control the situation, but it wasn't easy. Nothing ever was in that place. They managed to sedate the Shadow Man and take him back to his room, but that wasn't the end. A week later, I found him wandering the halls alone, unrestrained. That was a serious security breach, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I was in the middle of checking the West Wing when I saw him. He was standing there, his back against the wall again, muttering, except this time, the muttering wasn't random. His words were clearer, more deliberate. Killed them all. The demons were eating their brains. The words cut through the air, freezing me in place. I couldn't move. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Wife, children, had to save them, had to eat the demons before they spread. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Those words, they didn't just come from someone who was insane. They came from someone who believed that something far worse than insanity was controlling him. He wasn't just talking about killing his family. He was talking about demons. It was then that I learned the truth, though I wish I hadn't. The head doctor, Dr. Peters, had called me into his office a few days later and told me what had really happened. Thomas Reeves had been a schoolteacher, a normal, mild-mannered man, until one night he snapped. They found him in his home surrounded by the bodies of his wife and children. The police report was too grisly to fully comprehend. They said he had butchered them, but not just in the usual way. No, he believed that they had been taken over by demons. He took his belief about brain-dwelling demons very literally. He thought he had to eat them, consume the demons, before they could spread to him. That was the moment when the pieces began to fall into place. His hands, twisted as they were, had been trying to wring out the demons, trying to prevent whatever force he thought was inside him from getting free. The muttering, it was him trying to communicate with whatever voices he thought were trapped in his mind. "Keep your distance from that one," Dr. Peters warned me. "We've tried all kinds of treatments, but nothing sticks. Some minds are just broken beyond repair." I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded and left the office, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at play. The doctor's words haunted me, especially his last comment, "What's really lurking in all our heads, waiting to break free." 2 weeks later, I quit. It wasn't just the shadow man anymore. It was the entire place, the darkness that hung over it, the suffocating fear that you couldn't escape no matter how hard you tried. I couldn't go back after what happened that night. It had been a typical shift. I was walking past the kitchen when I saw the door slightly ajar, and there, in the middle of the room, was the Shadow Man. He was crouched over one of the cooks, his hands trembling as they reached for the man's head, pulling at his hair. Edward was taking a long piece of plastic from the demons in his brain. We stopped him in time, but it was clear the asylum could no longer contain him. Security moved him to the maximum security ward after that. The doctor's prognosis was grim. Hopeless. In the security report, it was noted that Thomas Reeves continued to express cannibalistic ideation and paranoid delusions. The worst part? They still had no idea what had triggered his descent into madness. As for me, I never went back to St. Augustine's. The images of those twisted hands, the endless muttering, and the chilling scream that echoed through the halls still haunt me in the quiet moments of the night. But the one thing that truly stayed with me was that question the doctor had asked. What's really lurking in all our heads, waiting to break free? The asylum shut down a few years after I left, but sometimes on a cold winter's night, when the wind is right, I think I can still hear the Shadow Man's voice whispering from somewhere deep inside the walls. I started working at Cedar Heights Asylum in late October 1973. The pay was good, especially for night shifts in the East Wing, what the staff quietly called the Mirror Ward. It wasn't until my third week that I understood why. The East Wing had always been shrouded in a certain kind of unease. At first I thought it was the building itself, the peeling wallpaper, the low ceilings, the faint, musty smell that seemed to linger in the walls. But it was more than that. It was the patients, They weren't like the others. And the thing about this particular ward was, it didn't take long for you to get the sense that something was watching you. All 20 patients in that wing suffered from the same delusion. They claimed their reflections were trying to kill them. The hospital's solution was brutally simple. Remove every reflective surface. Windows were frosted, metal was painted, and patients used plastic utensils. Even the floor wax was switched to a matte finish. There was nothing left that could reflect light or show a distorted image. The stories from the doctors were chilling. I remember the first one I heard, from Martha, my supervisor. She told me during my orientation, lighting a cigarette between her fingers as she spoke. It started with one patient, she said, the smoke curling around her. A woman named Eleanor Kane, rich, a socialite. She suddenly started destroying every mirror in her mansion. By the time they brought her in, she'd gouged her own eyes out with a silver spoon. She said she had to stop herself from seeing what her reflection was becoming. That was the beginning. Within a month, 3 more patients arrived with the exact same symptoms. By summer, the entire East Wing was dedicated to treating what the doctors called reflective identity disorder. It was still in the early stages of understanding, so nobody could explain how the delusion was spreading so quickly, or what was triggering it. All they knew was that once it started, there was no turning back. I worked with Loveth, a teenage girl who had been admitted after trying to drown herself in a lake. She had long curly hair and a faraway look in her eyes. The reflection wasn't mine anymore, Loveth told me one evening during a session, her voice barely above a whisper. It smiled when I frowned. It blinked when my eyes were open, and its teeth, they kept getting longer. Her description was disturbing, but not unusual for the patients in the East Wing. The doctors had prescribed heavy antipsychotics, but the delusions persisted. It wasn't just mirrors that triggered their fear. Any reflective surface would do. They would scream about seeing their reflections in spoons, in raindrops on windows, even in each other's eyes. We had to sedate them just to give them basic care, like sponge baths. The sight of water's surface would send them into hysterics. One night as I was doing my rounds, I heard Loveth talking in her room. This wasn't unusual. Most patients in the ward would talk to themselves, some more vocally than others. But Loveth's voice was different this time. She was speaking in complete sentences, having what sounded like a coherent conversation. "No, I won't. You can't make me. They'll know it's not me." Her voice was soft but firm. I stood in front of the observation window, my heart pounding in my chest. Loveth was sitting cross-legged on her bed, facing the wall. The room was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. But something was wrong. Despite the faint light, Loveth cast no shadow. I unlocked the door, confusion filling me. "Loveth, who are you talking to?" Her head turned slowly and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There was something wrong about her face. It was distorted, like a photograph that was slightly out of focus. Her eyes looked like they were staring right through me, and the way she moved, it wasn't natural. It was reversed, like I was watching her in a mirror. "Loveth's gone," she said. Her voice was slower than it should have been, like I was hearing the words before her mouth moved. She wouldn't trade places, so I broke through and took her anyway. A sickening smile spread across her face. Her teeth, they were wrong. Sharp and metallic, like jagged pieces of glass. I stumbled backward, the blood draining from my face. I ran. I ran through the hall, past the nurse's station, fumbling with my keycard at the security door. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of other doors opening. I heard other voices speaking in unison, slightly out of sync with their movements. As I reached the staff lounge, I called security. The phone trembled in my hand. When they arrived, they found all 20 patients standing in the hallway. Their faces were blurred, their movements reversed. Each of them spoke as one, in a chorus that sent chills through me. The reflections were always stronger. We just needed time to break through. They evacuated the building immediately, calling in specialists and sending the patients to other facilities. The official report blamed mass hysteria combined with contaminated medication. The East Wing was permanently closed. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I pass store windows or glance in my rearview mirror, I see them. 20 blurred faces, all with twisted mirror-shard smiles. And sometimes, my reflection moves a fraction of a second too late. The most terrifying part? Cedar Heights wasn't the only hospital with a mirror ward. That summer, there were 13 others across the country, all closed now, all sealed up. But the reflections, they had to go somewhere. They didn't disappear just because the wards were shut down. They're still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. So if you ever catch your reflection moving wrong or smiling when you're not, don't look again, and whatever you do, don't answer when it starts to speak. Because it's so much easier for them to break through when you're watching. If you've enjoyed this spine-tingling journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More unsettling stories are coming your way soon. Stay cautious and never ignore your instincts.